Well, that was a very lovely song. There for a long time we divided Quakers into two groups, unprogrammed and programmed friends, and now I think we can have a further separation, and that is the wavers and the clappers. And so I almost clapped after that was done, but just in time to see wavers, and I thought, oh, this is a waiver monthly meeting. So, oh my gosh. And Brenda, thank you for bringing to my mind the memory of Tom Mullen. I became a Quaker because of Tom Mullen when I was 16 years old, and my parents had cut the tethers to the Catholic Church, allowed us boys to experiment. And I was in love with several young Quaker teenage girls back there in Danville, and so began attending the meeting, which felt so different from my experience in the Catholic Church, which had always been so somber. And on the third Sunday at Danville Friends meeting, Tom Mullen was invited to speak. And he stood and he told the story of his first pastorate in Newcastle Friends meeting, which had just been rocked by a scandal when the previous pastor had ran off with the church secretary. Tom said they were taking no chances with me. The secretary they hired was 75 years old. And boy, could that guy type. And I thought, anybody who can say that in church and have people laugh and not be scandalized, that is a church I want to belong to. And so I became a Quaker, which in some ways was a coming home for me. The first Gulleys in America were 4 Quaker brothers who landed in North Carolina. And all of them eventually married Methodists and Baptists and were shown the door. My particular ancestor found his way into the Baptist church, which lasted until my grandmother, my father's mother, who was a very ardent Baptist. And one of these women who took it upon herself to make my siblings and me fit for civilization. Fortunately, we didn't see her often. When my parents were first married, they moved 120 miles away from her to Danville, Indiana, to give themselves a little breathing room. But my grandmother was a very determined woman, so would drive to our house every couple of months and stay for a long weekend. I say long weekend, though it was only 2 days, it just felt longer. But on the weekends she visited, before her arrival, my parents would caution us to be on our best behavior. The difficulty was in knowing what constituted best behavior, since we never knew in advance the theme of her visit. Whether she might teach us the proper way to greet dignitaries just in case the Queen of England happened to visit Danville, Indiana, or the appropriate attire for public events, or grammar. My grandmother was big on grammar. I still remember those grammar weekends. She would always begin her grammar lecture by saying there were some words we shouldn't ever say. My brothers and I would ask her which words that we needed to know them, so we wouldn't accidentally mention them. She'd say, I can't repeat them. Perhaps you can write them down, we would ask her. Or maybe whisper them in her ears. They were always variations of the known bad words. So gosh darn and heck and shoot and son of a gun. Did I mention she was Baptist? Of course, times have changed. When my son, Sam, came home from basic training, because this is what the children of Quaker pastors do, they join the military. He came home after 6 weeks in basic training. I said, well, Sam, what did you learn? And his eyes bugged out of his head, and he said, my sergeant taught me that Teresa isn't the only word that comes after mother. Now, there was a man who could have used my grandmother. This morning, I want to talk about wrong words, bad words, dangerous words. There's a man named Timothy Schneider who was born in Dayton, Ohio, to Quaker parents. He is now a professor of history at Yale University and has written, among other things, an instructive little book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. In that book, Schneider wrote about a member of the Nazi Party named Carl Schmitt, an attorney by training, who created the legal underpinnings for the Holocaust. Remember that the atrocities of the Nazis were framed in legal language always. Carl Schmitt said the best way to destroy all rules was to focus on the idea of the exception. The exception. You convince people that the present moment is so fraught with danger that exceptions to the rule of law must be made. You then persuade people that the exception, the temporary deviation from the norms of decency, must become permanent. Timothy Schneider said this was the basis for every fascist movement around the globe. Fascists always start by warning us that we are in danger, that we are at risk, that we must suspend our usual practices and customs in order to counter some imagined evil. Timothy Schneider said in times of social change to listen carefully for the growing claims of exceptions. And we're already hearing them, aren't we? We're already hearing them. Presidents must be above the law in order to do their jobs. So we become a nation of men, not laws. America must expand its territory, so we threaten to seize land that isn't ours. Native-born children aren't true citizens, so we become a nation with legal protection for some but not others. We've been here before. In 1942, the newspaper columnist Walter Lippmann, hoping to persuade President Roosevelt into giving military authorities on the West Coast a free hand to round up and imprison 120,000 American citizens of Japanese descent, wrote, without offering any evidence, the Pacific Coast is in imminent danger of an attack from within. Colonel Carl Benditson of the U.S. Army, placed in charge of the internment, even ordered the arrest of Japanese infants adopted by white families. Telling a priest in charge of an orphanage in Los Angeles, I am determined that if they have one drop of Japanese blood in them, they must go to a camp. Where have we heard that before? The same logic has been used to enslave black people, consign Native Americans to reservations, load Jewish people on trains, and now Hispanics are targeted. One drop of blood is all it takes. In times like these, we must listen closely for the language of exception, lest it create a permanent state of perceived emergency and thus becomes the doorway to tyranny. Despite my grandmother's best intentions, she never actually taught us the truly bad words. The truly bad words are the words that single out the other, the words that justify evil, the words intended to stoke fear, not understanding. Those are the bad words. Think for a moment of the bookends of Jesus' life. From his infancy, Jesus owed his life to the civil disobedience of wise and honorable men who refused to reveal his whereabouts to Herod, who wanted him dead. In this season of Lent, consider how his life ended at the hands of people demanding an exception. You'll remember that when Jesus was arrested, he stood before Pilate, who thought him innocent and said so to the gathered mob, telling them, I find no basis for a charge against him. In the custom of Passover, I will release one prisoner. Let it be this man. Instead, the mob demanded an exception and shouted back, no, not him. Release Barabbas instead. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Today, you can do that and get a presidential pardon. So Barabbas was pardoned. Pilate, what a mess of a man he was. Smart enough to know Jesus was innocent, but not brave enough to stand with him. A lot of that going around these days. Pilate made an exception. Barabbas was pardoned. Jesus was killed. Jesus owed his life to the civil disobedience of wise and honorable people. He owed his death to people demanding an exception. Pay attention, friends. Listen carefully for the language of exception, for the mob's demand that our nation's integrity be set aside for the sake of safety or personal gain or balanced budgets. Listen carefully for any demand that would have us forsake grace for greed. To be sure, there are people who pose a threat to our nation, but it is never the dispirited and starving mother wading a river, her infant in arms, dreaming of a new life in the promised land. She is not the danger. The real threat is posed by those who confuse evil for good, who with the bellows of hatred fan the embers of fear into a conflagration, who believe that one drop of blood can make someone our enemy and not our friend.